This individual, his name is Talha Joubert. He's 19 years old. In fact, he's not on the slide, but his friend Owen Rose, the pair of them are part of something called the COM, or otherwise known as Scattered Spider. Owen Rose, his friend, is 18, by the way. He just turned 18 after his arrest, so that now they can release his name. So they're incredibly young. But the point I'm making here is these are individuals that are incredibly skilled at social engineering. Scattered Spider, or the COM, these are individuals from all over the world, Australia, Canada, UK, US. So they will leverage that and understand, local dialects and commonalities and use that against, I say the victims in quotes. Now, Talha here was responsible for over $115 million of extortion, which is incredible. Anyway, he received this email. First off, timing. And I know this because if you go on YouTube, there's an interview with Josh and he reveals what happened. It's very interesting to watch. This happens on a Monday morning. He's busy, loads of projects going on. He's got to take his work seriously. He's got a lot to do. Now he's got this email saying his two-factor authentication credentials are going to expire. Authority. I mean, you can't see it here, but this came from npmjs.help. It's a genuine website, except it's not. It should have been .com. So he thought there was an authority here, that it was coming from the original source. Let's have shorter micro segments, 3 to 7 minutes. Gamification, it works with apps. My daughter does Duolingo, she's trying to learn French, and she loves that gamified experience. Just in time. Multi-channel is an interesting one. I kind of touched on this. Only 21% train on this. And this is going back to what I was saying. If you get a text message from your CEO, and I've had this at organizations, this wasn't from the CEO, said, I'm at this event, could you do me a favor and share this document, whatever it may be. And that was a text message. Now I know that wasn't real because I have a separate personal number and a separate work number. Many of us don't. We have that one number, that one bucket everything falls into. But we need to start showing it. It's not just trying to identify the source, but where it's coming into can flag. As I say, if you've got a message on Facebook Messenger from your bank, well, it's ridiculous. It wouldn't happen. We need that absurdity in the workplace. Like, why is this message coming here? Okay, deepfakes. In the session last year, actually, I presented a video. There was a guy called Gary Shildorn. He's an attorney based out of Philadelphia in the US. This was a story from 2020, and he basically had a phone call from his son. I don't know if any of you were at that session last year, but he had a phone call supposedly from his son saying, Dad, I've been involved in a car accident. There's a pregnant lady involved. He was panicked. Oh, you okay? He said, yeah, I'm going to have to call you back. The police are here. It wasn't his son. It was a deep fake of his voice. Now, just think about this for a moment. This was 2020. It was over 5 years ago. The capabilities we have now are far better, and he fell for that. That was his own son. He knows his son's voice. But it was such a heightened moment. This is important. You don't just need better reporting tools. You need a culture where telling the truth about security feels safe and normal. Okay, so you're all here for the right session, I hope, beyond the click. So quick introduction. They made me do this, put my picture up there. I'm not that egocentric, but we'll go with it. So I work for Veeam Software. I'm a field CISO. I've been at Veeam for about 2 years now. Now, despite the fact I work for a vendor, you are not going to hear any vendor pitch whatsoever in this. This topic is entirely detached from what we do. That said, I am going to hang out at our booth downstairs after this. So feel free, if you want to continue this conversation, come down and chat and we'll grab a coffee. So I don't know how many of you are almost fatigued with ransomware. We've been talking about ransomware for years. Hands up, who's getting a bit sick of hearing about ransomware? Okay, yeah. Me too.
We don't want to have it, but you're getting...
Unfortunately, yeah, we don't want to have it.
Ignoring.
So I'm not going to make this whole thing about ransomware, but let's just level set of where we are. And I'm going to start off with one of my favorite quotes by Bruce Schneier, and that's that amateurs hack systems, professionals hack people. In fact, my first book recommendation is a friend of mine, Jenny Radcliffe. I don't know if you know of her. She's known as the People Hacker. She's got a book out, look on Amazon. She talks all about this, and she's awesome. And she's got some incredibly interesting stories in that book to share. Now, this is certainly not breaking news. Threat actors are exfiltrating and encrypting data. Well, that's not going to surprise anyone, is it? But this is what we're dealing with ransomware. 87% of the ransomware incidents that we see within the company, we've got our own intelligence. We acquired a company called Coveware. They do instant response. So they're working firsthand with thousands of ransomware cases each year. And they're seeing that 7% are obviously exfiltrating data and 85% are encrypting that data. Some of it could just be denial of access. But let's just take a lens at one of the individuals behind these ransomware groups. And why I'm going to deviate from the topic of ransomware, by the way, to social engineering and how this factored into security awareness. This individual, his name is Talha Joubert. He's 19 years old. In fact, he's not on the slide, but his friend Owen Rose, the pair of them are part of something called the COM, or otherwise known as Scattered Spider. Based in East London, so you can tell by my accent, I'm originally from the UK, just south of London. It's funny, they're from East London. Anyone heard of the TV show EastEnders in the UK? They're still going, by the way. That started in 1985, and it's still going. I was indoctrinated with that as a child, but luckily I don't see it anymore because I live in the US. However, that's where they're from the east of London. Owen Rose, his friend, is 18, by the way. He just turned 18 after his arrest, so that now they can release his name. So they're incredibly young. But the point I'm making here is these are individuals that are incredibly skilled at social engineering. Scattered Spider, or the COM, these are individuals from all over the world, Australia, Canada, UK, US. So they will leverage that and understand local dialects and commonalities and use that against, I say the victims in quotes. Now, Talha here was responsible for over 115 million US dollars of extortion, which is incredible. He's more than likely to have been involved in the MGM attack. So that's probably the most famous one. MGM 2023, Caesar's Palace, the casino. I wasn't there, but obviously the casino went dark. People couldn't get into their rooms. But that cost them an incredible amount, $100 million in quarter three losses of that year, 2023. So they've done some real damage. And I'm not going to read all the bullets here. And by the way, throughout this whole session, if you want to take pictures, feel free. And we'll also share slides on this as well. But yeah, he's going away for a long time. In fact, just this morning, I looked up just to see if there's any more news. The latest news was in September last year. So I'm guessing they're still awaiting sentencing. But yeah, they're going to be going away for a very long time. But before I get into this, their primary methodology, their approach is social engineering and reconnaissance. They're understanding about us or employees of the companies. How can they manipulate us from a psychological perspective? And that's where I'm going to take the rest of this session. But it's not just about ransomware and denying access to our data and demanding ransoms. There's data breaches as well. Now on my iPad that I carry, it's in my bag, I carry it everywhere. I'm obsessed with reports. I've got the Verizon data breach and incident response report. There's M-Trends reports. There's our own Veeam reports. I love to digest these. And one of my favorites is the IBM cost of a data breach report, which is where this is from. So some of you may be familiar with it. And it's been going on since 2017, but the trend isn't looking great. The cost globally, the average cost of a data breach is 4.4 million US dollars. And okay, that's come down a little bit since last year, but honestly, it's not great news, is it? It's not looking good. There's two metrics. When I speak to our customers and many of the CISOs I work with, two metrics which I think a lot of us find very interesting. In purple here, we have MTTI, or that mean time to identify that a data breach has happened. And again, since 2017, it's been around the same. Yes, it's come down, 181 days to identify, but you've got a further 60 days to then contain it, or MTTC, that mean time to contain the breach. And it's not looking great. 241 days last year it took organizations on average to identify and contain a breach. If I think of my personal data, my birth certificate, my passport, my information at home, to think it would be almost the best part of a year before I figure out that's happened on a personal level is haunting to me. So from an organizational point of view, when you're obviously thinking of regulatory pressures and all the other demands, that's scary. And I don't see this improving. I think it's going to get worse, unfortunately. So we're going to have some positivity at the end, don't worry. Now, last year, I was here in Toronto with CyberX, and I actually did a session called AI is a new force multiplier for ransomware. And I'm not going to deliver the whole session here, but I just want to recap some key points of that. Traditional click rate before AI was improving these messages. You used to think of phishing emails and going back to the Nigerian prince that was telling me that I'd won all this money or I had to look after his money. The click rate was around 12%. But with AI, and the language capabilities, this is now 54% for the AI-generated content here. And we're seeing that 1 in 6 are using AI tools with their breaches, groups like Scattered Spider. By the way, who's heard of ClickFix? Anyone feel you've got one here? So imagine an employee gets an email and there's maybe what's supposedly a Word document attached. They click on it, but it's not. It's an HTML file, and it opens up a fake Word page, and there could be a little dialog box in the middle, which is all generated on the web page, and it may say you need to verify your sign-on or something along those lines. They think that's a real, genuine pop-up that's come up. And this is what ClickFix is, and essentially, you say, click on Windows key and R, press Command and V. Now you've pasted a command in the command line, hit enter, and this is what the ClickFix is. It's tricking users into entering commands and manipulating them to do that. They're thinking it's genuine. So phishing is certainly evolving, and ClickFix, this is something I'm watching carefully because 47% here is now the top initial access method. And when we look at ransomware over the years, some of the stats I've seen is RDP has certainly been number one in terms of the protocol that's been used to gain access and have lateral movement across systems. So this is certainly one to watch. Now, the threat landscape has certainly changed. And the first story here, Arup Engineering. Some of you may have heard of this. I've got some nodding heads. So imagine this. This is a financial worker for this company on a Zoom call, and there's their CEO and various colleagues within the company, and they're manipulated into paying an invoice for $25 million US. Except everyone on that Zoom call was a deep fake. This is nuts. It's crazy. And that happened. So you can look at the news there. MGM, we've already talked about, but let's just look at this key insight here. Both of these attacks bypassed technical controls. They were targeting us as humans. And the culture here must account for these AI augmented threats. Now, what do I mean by that? If you look at any cybersecurity model, let's pick the cyber kill chain. I'm sure you're all familiar with the cyber kill chain. Lockheed Martin put that together. I think there's 7 discrete stages of an attack, and I don't have a slide on this, but let's just think about that for a moment. It starts at reconnaissance, we have delivery, weaponization. It goes all the way through to the end on action, on objectives. And we treat these as discrete stages or buckets, and our technical controls go into those. We may be doing some controls around reconnaissance or weaponization. We have next-gen firewalls and EDR solutions. And just walk around the floor, we've got all these vendors here that target these buckets. But what about the space between? I like to think of this as a cyber kill spectrum, and there is a gap in between each one. If I was to ask you, where on the cyber kill chain does social engineering happen, which is the predominant method of gaining access? There's probably a bit of reconnaissance and delivery. It's probably the first 4. So this is why I think of this as a cyber kill spectrum. So I want to think differently. Rather than thinking of controls for this bucket and this bucket, let's just take a step back and think, oh, wow, there's actually some things going on in the gaps here. Okay, deepfakes. In the session last year, actually, I presented a video. There was a guy called Gary Shildorn. He's an attorney based out of Philadelphia in the US. This was a story from 2020. And he basically had a phone call from his son. I don't know if any of you were at that session last year, but he had a phone call supposedly from his son saying, Dad, I've been involved in a car accident. There's a pregnant lady involved. He was panicked. So, are you okay? He said, yeah, I'm going to have to call you back. The police are here. It wasn't his son. It was a deep fake of his voice. Now, just think about this for a moment. This was 2020. It was over 5 years ago now. The capabilities we have now are far better, and he fell for that. That was his own son. He knows his son's voice. But it was such a heightened moment. And I'm going to touch on some of the psychological areas that touched on in a moment. So, okay, we've got this huge surge in deepfake fraud, and it's going to increase. And the average deepfake attacks, by the way, used to be 1 a month. But now, on average, it's 7 a day on average. And this is from, I've got actually sources for this. If you're interested in where all these numbers come from, and I apologize, there's going to be a lot of stats on this session. But it's eye-opening. And we got to stop teaching spot the fake. In fact, we just shared a story. I'm going to share it here. So I've got 2 daughters, and my youngest, I was sending her AI images saying, is this real or is it AI? Just for fun. But it got to the point. She just says everything is AI now, including me. I sent her a selfie a few weeks ago. She said, you're AI. I said, no, I'm real. I'm not AI. But this is where we're getting at. And there's some tests. I know you've run some tests in your organization, and spot the fake, I don't think is working. We're very confident that we can spot it. Going back to Gary Shildorn's case in 2020, what we have in terms of deepfakes for voice now, and even video, like the financial example, is incredibly convincing. So 60% think they can spot the deepfake. In actuality, it's around 24.5% that actually can correctly spot it. So we've set the scene there. Ransomware, I think, is more about social engineering. Yep, got a question.
Quick question. The what the fakes and all that. Our organization of this, so they have to maybe try a product as well that generates these fakes as well. But something like C2PA, these kind of almost like watermarks that they got to go forward.
So I know Google do something similar. To Google Gemini embed a watermark. It's very clever. You can, I don't know if you know this, by the way, but yeah, you can go to Google Gemini, give it an image. Is this real or is it fake? And it will look for those watermarks. I can't remember what they call it. They've got a name for their detection mechanism. But I think they can still be manipulated. And I've actually tried this. I've edited the image in Photoshop. I've combined AI images and it said, no, this is real. So I'm not convinced. That's just personal anecdote. So, but maybe that will help. But the problem is when we're targeting someone like my mother in her 70s and she's getting a message, they're not going to be doing that kind of stuff. So that's the concern. So should we talk about the psychology of an attack for the moment? Second book recommendation. I love my books. Has anyone read this? Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast versus Thinking Slow. I think every C-level executive, at least, should read a copy of this. Daniel highlights two systems of thinking in the brain. The first one is system one. So I'm driving my car, child runs out. I'm not going to think, should I stop or is this going to make me late? And maybe I should. You're going to slam the brakes on. You're not going to be thinking about that. So this is our automatic, quick decisions, very snappy. Ignore this number at the bottom. This is dubious. It's around 95%. A lot of our day-to-day decisions are very snappy. And then there's system two. This is the deliberate slow. So if I'm booking a vacation somewhere, I'm going to buy a house. I'm not going to be making, click done. I'm going to buy a house. I'm not that spontaneous. These are deliberate. But the attacker is trying to manipulate system one. They're trying to make us panic and think we've got to take action on this. So I'm going to give you an example next of where this was actually played out last year in September. Now, around 5% is system two. Take that with a grain of salt. But the point is, much of our day-to-day thinking is system one. And if I go back to the cyber kill chain, stepping back, let's look at the gaps. When something happens as an employee, I think it's very valuable to have that culture embedded that you can take pause. The speed of business, we're always trying to move so fast. Go and get a coffee. I love my coffee, by the way. All my space is in between. Before the session and afterwards, I'll be getting a coffee somewhere. But we can use that to our advantage. We can think, if you get an email, and I'm sure you've had this, an email from your boss that's made you angry. If you send a reply straight away, you probably regret it. If you sleep on it the next day, then your tone may change. So let's look at an actual attack here. And there's 4 areas. And by the way, I could have a third book recommendation. There's another book. I don't have it on the screen. These I borrowed from a psychologist called Robert Cialdini, another book, if you're familiar, The Psychology of Persuasion. Very fascinating reads. And I've got another slide that touches a bit more in depth on these areas he pulled out. But let me just read this email here. So last year, there's a guy called Josh Junon, who is a package maintainer for Node Package Manager. Who's heard of NPM, Node Package Manager? So it's used pretty much every SaaS platform, many websites, mobile apps. This is used heavily. It's a bit like, imagine if that's compromised, Log4j all over again. We didn't realize it was there. It's everywhere. So Josh used to manage a bunch of packages. There's thousands of packages. If you're familiar with Unix and Linux and Yum and apt-get and all these packages you can install, the Node's package manager is like that for the developer. Anyway, he received this email. First off, timing. And I know this because if you go on YouTube, there's an interview with Josh and he reveals what happened. It's very interesting to watch. This happens on a Monday morning. He's busy. He's got loads of projects going on. He's got to take his work seriously. He's got a lot to do. Now he's got this email saying his 2-factor authentication credentials are going to expire. Authority. And you can't see it here, but this came from npmjs.help. It's the genuine website. Except it's not. It should have been .com. So he thought there was an authority here, that it was coming from the original source. Urgency. If you look here, his account's going to be temporarily locked on September 10th. He received this on September 8th last year, so he had a couple of days. He's busy. He doesn't want to risk being locked out and waiting to the last minute. So we've now got urgency. And social proof is a more interesting one. So again, Robert Cialdini talks about this. If everyone else does it, you feel more compelled to do it as well. In fact, I saw, this was years ago, on British TV, there was a video of this waiting room. So imagine a room like this, everyone sat down and smoke starts coming out from under the door. There's a fire. So everyone apart from one person was a paid actor. So they all just read the newspaper and ignored it. This one guy looked around because no one was doing anything. He just sat there, even though there's smoke coming from under the door. You probably find that on YouTube. So that's what social proof's about. Now this one is a bit more discreet. But the fact this email's come from an authority and he thinks, okay, this is coming to everyone. It's not targeting him. It's a generic message. He has to take action. And what happened? He did fall for it. Now, Josh is a highly technical individual. He's a very clever guy. He knows security, but he still fell for this. He clicked that link. Now, what's interesting is like Log4j, was that 2021, 2022, something like that? Almost a distant memory now. It certainly made my Christmas very interesting. But like Log4j, this could have been the skeleton key to so many systems on the planet through a phishing email. And that's what's terrifying here. So, okay, the attacker psychology, and I said I'd zoom into, we talked about authority, we talked about social proof, but we've got some more up here. Oh. Okay, got some more up here. Trust, reciprocity. Let me just pick this one as an example. Imagine I was part of Scattered Spider and I'm going to socially engineer MGM again. Hey, why not? Yeah, it's their turn. I could call, and this is what they did, by the way. They looked on LinkedIn. Who are the IT admins? What tech are they working with? Who's reporting to who? We know there's already websites that pretty much give us org charts now for sales leads. Well, the attackers can use that. That's the reconnaissance. They're building a huge picture of the individual and the organization. And I could call, and I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to say, yeah, this is from the IT department. We're rolling out some updates. Have you had a message yet? Oh, okay, that's cool. And leave it there. And then you call again, maybe a week later. Yeah, just checking in. I've done my recon. I know that they could be a fan of a particular sports team. Like I say, yeah, I've got tickets, so I can't go. Don't know anyone that's a fan, Blue Jays, whatever it may be. Well, yes, I am. And then well, I'll send them on to you. Now the victim thinks, well, this is a nice person. They're sending me some tickets. So this is great. When they call again, yeah, there's updates. Do you mind if we just run the update now? This is reciprocity. They feel compelled to do them a favor. They've already got that bond. Now, if I did that playbook, I'd probably fail straight away. I am not a good social engineer, so that's not the playbook, but you get the idea. And there's many others here, and we don't have to go through each one, but you get the idea here. So, going back to the psychology of persuasion and some of these principles, then I've highlighted these top two because authority and social proof are certainly the top two. It could be any one of these, by the way, but there was a study of these participants where these two were found. And I think the key point here that I want to make is security awareness alone isn't what's protecting against persuasion, this culture. How many of you have had to do your own or other social security awareness training, and you're like, click, and I can't bypass it. Okay, I've got to watch the whole video. And then you get to the end, I got that one, and there's a quiz. I better go back. What was the answer to that? And you're going back, and they're just not effective. And I think culture is more effective. And I was just sharing, I've got my mother, she's in her 70s. She's always getting phishing attacks and looking at social media and saying, look at this video of this tiger eating a family. I said, no, that was fake. And rather than telling her this is what, being aware that you need this knowledge, we need on top of that, this culture of stop, pause, report it. I'm going to touch more on that in a moment. Okay, it's probably a good place to pause before I start going beyond the perimeter. Any questions so far on the psychology aspects? Yeah.
So, we could run at what space at the end we would like on the DK. At this point, I would call for the clarity. Yet was a second. Back.
So just to make sure I understand the question, you're running a phishing test simulation and you want to, so I touch on that at the end. So if I don't answer that, put your hand up again. So I do touch on that. Okay. So we've got this 8% problem. So I'm sure many of you have heard humans are the weakest link. I don't agree. Maybe you do, and we can talk about that. But 8% of employees are actually causing 80% of the problem. This is according to Proofpoint, by the way. So the statement I'm going to make is let's stop training everyone the same way. It's clearly not working. In fact, may have the stat up here later, but Gartner, say we spend about, I think it's $210+ billion a year globally on cybersecurity. Yet every single day I pick up my phone and there's someone else with a data breach, there's a ransomware attack. It's just happening constantly. So it's clearly something's not working here. But human risk management is identifying high-risk individuals. You're going back to the financial fraud, CEOs, C-level executives. We could start changing the culture around that group of people. If that filters down, I think we're onto something. So let me dive into that in a bit more detail. First off, the University of San Diego found that there was no significant relationship between taking the security awareness training and the actual resistance to phishing. The other one here in Zurich, this is a university in Zurich, they had employees that received embedded training. So the phishing simulations, and if they failed them, it would then come up with training embedded in those simulations. So you're pretty familiar with some of those. That had no impact at all on subsequent attacks. The 18.5 were more likely to fall for subsequent attacks. It actually made things worse in some cases. And Gartner actually predict that 50% of CISOs at large enterprises will start adopting a more human-centric approach in security awareness and design. Okay, now I'm talking about the cyber kill chain. This isn't it, but it's similar. We've got reconnaissance, delivery, exploitation. But what's happening here? If someone's compromised, we could think back to the MGM attack, for example. If an individual is compromised, now we have this lateral movement. And I'm not just talking technically. If you're into cybersecurity, red teaming, we've got this term pivoting on a system. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about from the human level. We've now compromised the identity of someone. Now the phishing can come from what it seems like within. So we've got to train employees. It says down here, verify these unusual requests if they appear to come from a colleague. And if I just break script for the moment, I'm going to just share something I do personally. How many of you use a messaging service like Facebook Messenger, or WhatsApp, Signal Messenger? Okay, we've got some hands here. I use Signal Messenger, so regardless of which one it is, if you've got a message supposedly from your bank saying your account's being compromised, click here, and it was on, say, Signal Messenger or Facebook Messenger, would you believe that? It's ridiculous. They don't have access to your Facebook Messenger. It doesn't make sense.
Oh.
If my wife said, hey, what time are you home today? But it came to my corporate email, I think, why is she sending it there? It just doesn't make sense. But we're training employees to look at the source, like Josh Junon's case, npmjs.help. That must be the genuine thing, but it wasn't. It should have been .com. We have all our eggs in one basket. We've got an email address and a phone number. That's pretty much it. So if I get a payroll system notification that comes to the same email, my security awareness training comes through. If I get an HR email, it comes through the same email that my boss messages me at, and so on. So we're funneling everything to these single sources, email, phone number, that can be manipulated. And by the way, if you go back to Scattered Spider, they weren't originally known as a ransomware group. They were social engineers. SIM swapping was their biggest thing. And if you're familiar with SIM swapping, if you find out which carrier I'm with, you can socially engineer the phone provider to do the SIM swap. You say you've lost your phone, blah, blah, blah. But eventually you gain access to my phone number. Now you're receiving two-factor authentication codes, various things like that. And that's how they're getting in. On a personal level, and I say I'm going to break script, I've done some things to mitigate against that. I'll be happy to chat about that later. I use virtual phone numbers and VoIP numbers. There's no carrier to socially engineer. And I have multiple email addresses. Personally, I've got hundreds of email addresses. There's systems to do that. But when we think to our organization, we're trusting the employee to look, is this source correct? Is the email address it's come from? We just hover over the link. There's traditional things you're taught to look at the wording. That's just not working anymore. Don't have the answer, but that's a conversation we should have later. There's an interesting area to talk about there. Okay, how are we doing for time? Got a lot of slides. So I'm going to spend the next 10 hours, speed up because I want to get to important stuff. So the security awareness paradox then, again, Verizon report that 60% of breaches involve the human element. But I don't want everyone to think that means humans are the weakest link. That's not the case. 96% of employees who took these risky actions knew it was risky. Now, again, I'm going to share another personal story here. Been around in the IT industry for a very long time, coming up 30 years. I feel old now. But back in the early days, I had a manager that said to me, and I was on call out, by the way, as an internet service provider. I'd get called out to various incidents at 2 a.m, things like that. And he said, if you're on your own, you've got to make a decision. We employed you for your skill set. If you make a mistake, just own up, because we allowed that to happen. And I've never, ever forgotten what he said. He said, if you make a mistake, let us know, because it means we as an organization let that happen. So it made me feel safe in the fact that if I did make a mistake, I can report that and they've got my back. I don't have to hide it. And unfortunately, I see so many organizations that penalize employees if they fail the training, rather than celebrate them through champion programs. Internally at Veeam, we have something called the golden fish ticket. If you report phishing emails that are simulated enough, you get entered into a draw and you can win an Amazon gift card, that type of thing. And that's certainly a step in the right direction. But if employees feel like they're going to be reprimanded for clicking the link, maybe they click a genuine link and it wasn't a simulation, they're going to think, oh, what have I done? And they keep quiet. Well, that's not good. I'm sure your SOC teams want to get on it within minutes and not hours or days even. So, statement to finish this slide before I get into this. Let me skip forward a bit more, actually. Don't need to see that one. Let's go into the solution. I want to make the most of the time here. So, on the psychological aspect of this. We call it psychological safety. And there's various figures here, and I'm going to read this directly. I don't normally read from the slides, but this is important. You don't just need better reporting tools. You need a culture where telling the truth about security feels safe and normal. And this is from the UK's National Crime Security Centre. And a question for you in your own organisation, you don't have to answer this now, but just think this in the back of your head. Would an employee at your organisation feel safe if they did click a link and maybe started going through with a click fix attack before realising? Would they report it, or would they think, I'm going to go home now and pretend this never happened? Yeah, what have I done? And this is why I go back to, it was 25 years ago. My former manager said, if you make a mistake, we allowed it to happen. And obviously it resonated. I'm still talking about it today, all this time later. All right, so what can we do? So this section is the solution. Let's reverse engineer what the attackers are doing and see how we can turn this into our advantage, our defenses. So authority. If executives visibly champion security, for example, messaging from the CEO, leadership, town halls, if they mention security during this. Second one, social proof. What about 82% of your colleagues have completed this training? Here's some leaderboards. Now we're publicly recognizing within the company the reporters, the ones that are taking an effort. I used to be at VMware before Veeam, and there was a security. They started doing T-shirts and mugs, and people thought it was cool. It had security written on it, so they wanted the swag. But they were doing anything to try and create champions within the organization. Another one, reciprocity. I talked about this earlier, that the attacker uses against us. Well, how about provide some valuable personal cybersecurity resources, whether that's password manager that you could use personally. Maybe there's a corporate account, you can sign up for a free personal account as well. 1Password, for example. And then recognition. Celebrate those employees that report the phishing. Create these heroes, not villainizing the employee base. And I think we really have an opportunity here. And if we flip what the attackers are doing, there's a 76% higher engagement with reward-based versus punishment initiatives there. Okay, 8 minutes left. Okay, metrics that matter. Won't go through all of these one by one. Feel free to take a picture. But this is the targets for mature programs. We need that maturity in the organization to get here. We want the phish-prone percentage to be under 5%. We want the reporting rate to be around this. That's where we want to get to. Now, how do we understand where we are? We've got maturity models. I'm going to share a slide on this in a moment. I thought it was next, but it's coming up in a while. But some of the things we should start measuring, let's measure phishing reporting rates. This gives us our detection capability. The time to report, which is our response speed. You can see all these here. I won't read them out one by one. but these really matter. Interventions. I talked about these long security awareness training videos, and we get them for, it's not just security, we get these training videos where we have to complete on an annual basis. Why just annually? This clearly isn't working. Rather than going through 40 minutes for one module and then there's a quiz and you've got to go back and figure out what you didn't answer, let's have shorter micro segments, 3 to 7 minutes. Gamification. It works with apps. My daughter does Duolingo. She's trying to learn French and she loves that gamified experience. Just in time. Multi-channel is an interesting one. I kind of touched on this. Only 21% train on this. And this is going back to what I was saying. If you get a text message from your CEO, and I've had this at organizations, this wasn't from the CEO, said, oh, I'm at this event, could you do me a favor and share this document, whatever it may be. And that was a text message. Now, I know that wasn't real because I have a separate personal number and a separate work number. Many of us don't. We have that one number, that one bucket everything falls into. But we need to start showing it. It's not just trying to identify the source, but where it's coming into can flag. As I say, if you've got a message on Facebook Messenger from your bank, but it's ridiculous, it wouldn't happen. We need that absurdity in the workplace. Like, why is this message coming here? For example, if your boss only messages you on Teams, we need to start segmenting the communication channels. Champions are talked about, and then this continuous learning, not just annual training. Okay, I've got 6 minutes. So building the security culture program. I won't read all this out. You can see what we're aiming for here. Yeah, got a question.
We have 5 words that what about bank? That we a Catholic got it.
So you have what? So what was the first one? Fire wardens. Cyber wardens, absolutely, yeah. Those champions. There's a slide, in fact, it's here. What we're recommending for these champions is if a team of 10 have a champion, any team size 10 to 20, have at least one champion in that team. That has been shown to really work. Now, something I've mentioned here, this is a bit of a segue into some VM news, is DSPM. One of the problems we have is we don't have, as leaders in security, true visibility in what employees actually have access to. Let me just give you a story. And I'm segueing from this slide, but I think it's an important one. Back in the 90s, when it was Windows NT4 and the organization we worked with, we had an iDrive. It was a network share. And there was a folder for finance and a folder for HR. I'm sure that's familiar to a lot of you. And as an IT admin, I had access to all of those. And what was in HR? Employee salaries, reports. It was crazy, the level of access I had. But now look at today, 2026, we have SharePoint, there's Confluence, there's Dropbox. We have all these places of unstructured data. 90% is falling into these, that we don't know who has access to what. We need that visibility, and I've got a slide on that, but that's why that's in here. We want to aim at this true visibility so we know if there's PII, who could actually access that within the organization. And it's quite surprising when we speak to our customers how many, SharePoint, how much access is given where it shouldn't be to the wrong teams, the wrong individuals, and so on. Okay, I'm going to just skip a few slides because on that, we've got building the business case, and I'm happy to share some of this, by the way. We've got 4 minutes left, so I want to just focus on this one. This is building the maturity model. Oh, let's go back. So we don't want to be here or below. This is the negligence threshold. Now this comes from our own, it's called data resilience maturity model, or DRMM, but we can apply this to what we're talking about today in terms of security awareness. We don't want to be reactive and manual. Reliable but limited, okay, but we want to get here. This is our desired state. So how do we get there? Well, I talked about some of the plans, a 30, 60, 90-day plan. I'll share the slide. I know I'm going fast. But please come and talk to us because we also have data security posture management, I think is an important piece here. What I think this does is that 90% of enterprise data that's unstructured, that's on SharePoint, on Dropbox, in the cloud, AWS, all over the place. If we're starting to give AI access to this now, and someone could have access but doesn't know, or teams have access to things they shouldn't have, but no one's ever tried it, guess what? AI will. It will know. If I was talking to my colleague about this, he was looking for his benefits number, and he asked, we use Copilot internally. Bingo, there it is. Now, I couldn't get it because it got it from his email. It wasn't on SharePoint. But we are seeing so many organizations have this data out there. And guess what? Social engineering, Scattered Spider, Talajubert, those individuals, they're going to be leveraging this. So if your data's there, you don't want them to find it before you do. So that's why I bring this up. And if you're interested in this, do come and talk to us. Coming up to the last 2 minutes, so I'll just end it here. Security AI is our data security posture management solution. We acquired them in December, so just last month, for $1.7 billion. They are incredible in what they do, but I don't want to make this a vendor pitch, so I'm going to just end it there. And we've got 1 minute for questions. So I know I went fast, but we just leave it there. Any questions? There's a lot to think about. And the purpose of this slide deck as well is hopefully to give you something to think about and come and see me. I'm going to hang out at the Veeam booth for a couple of hours after this as well. So if you want to continue the conversation, please come and say hello. But there's a lot of moving parts. But just remember that Gartner recommendation that we need to start focusing on the human-centric and the culture. That 60% of CISOs are going to be doing that by 2027 is what they recommend. I think we need to start taking some actions. There's a call to action here. So here's the steps. We need to act now. With that, I thank you for attending. Thank you so much.
Just